Magnificent afternoon and fantastic morning wherever you are in the world. This is Carla from Rehan Allahwala's World of Connections. And today I am here to speak with Marie Magdalena Wolf, who is now currently living in Denver, Colorado, or very close to it. And she has a very interesting business and way of life, which is important for all of us. And I can't wait to have her begin talking. Having said that, I want to remind you that this show, like all of my shows, is sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which is an online organization promoting peace one conversation at a time. Marie, will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, Carla. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm so grateful to be here. Hello to your beautiful audience. Hello, everybody, wherever you are watching us or watching the replay from. My name is Marie Magdalena Wolf. I'm originally from France. I live in the US. And I work in the realm of intimacy, relationships, and sexuality. And I am a coach. So it's a little different from therapy, but it's the idea of transformation. I help my clients, men, women, and couples, transform their lives through healing sexual trauma, having better relationships, better communication, and more pleasure in the bedroom and feeling more confident in their body. So in a nutshell, this is what I do.
Okay, now how long have you been doing this and what kind of drove you to this type of work?
I've been doing it for 5 years. And prior to my coaching certification, I was, and I still am, a yoga and Pilates teacher. So I've been working with mindfulness and helping people connect to the body prior than coaching. And coaching for me is a way to help my clients go even deeper. Now, to answer your second question, what really drove me to that is trying to find solutions for myself. I was unhappy in a previous relationship and I was trying to find solutions. I was really frustrated. We were fighting and arguing a lot. And I was not satisfied sexually. And I knew there was more to intimacy than I was experiencing. I could feel in my being there had to be more. And through my searching, I'd find a wonderful teacher with whom I did a coaching certification, Leila Martin. And I had done some therapy and some counseling before that yield some results, but not enough. And through my journey of healing, I realized how beautiful and so important this work is, which led me to become a sexuality and relationship coach. Really, you had told me that 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have been like, what? So it's my own journey that led me to want to help other people.
Wonderful. You know, in the world today, you say the word sex, people want to run away, like, you don't talk about it. And because you don't talk about it, it becomes bigger than it really is. Or maybe I'm thinking about it that way. Because of that, how do you see it? And you can say the word sex, there's nothing wrong with it. You know?
Thank you. I think that's a really meaningful question. Sex can mean very different things for different people, depending on their age, their culture, their relationships, and their experience. For me, first of all, sex is essential to our humanity, our soul being in this human body, and it's part of our potential. It's part of a gift of life. And I don't think it's necessary. People can choose not to have sex. But if people choose to have sex, I think it's important that they discover the depth of that experience and the potential of it. there is so much pleasure, so much connection, um, so much expansion, and even spiritual possibilities in sex. And this is what fascinates me the most, how much more there is to it than what people usually think about or talk about. And you're right to say that it is taboo a lot. And part of my work is to make it simple to talk about it, to make it safe, and to make it easy. Because so many people have the same issues, and it's important to help them.
I know, I remember my mother actually and not being able to talk about sex. Even friends, you run away, but it's natural. And I don't quite get what's going on here, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, my understanding is even though we live in a more progressive time, a lot of us have inherited religious imprints that tells us that sex is bad or sinful or dangerous. And part of the conversation is transforming that. And also, what you're talking about is the lack of sex education for people.
Yeah.
And so what happens is you grow up, you understand that your body can give you pleasure, but you understand that you should not talk about it. So then for a lot of people, there is no really access to information except for porn. And especially in this day and age of digital technology, porn has become so much more accessible than it was 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago. And so in a way, it shows that it's possible, but it also gives a lot of misinformation. And I have a lot of men and women who come to me and ask me questions that come from their misunderstanding or their lack of education. And part of talking about it really is like information, education, and getting over the shame of not having been able to talk about it before.
I remember a friend telling me that she was talking to a very young Pakistani girl. And the girl said, "Oh no, I must be pregnant. I just kissed someone." And I was like, "No, but how can we help these conversations become more open and honest?"
I think the first thing is to make it okay and to help people feel safe. So I have a private Facebook group, and they have an option to share under an anonymous setting. So that's one way. You share anonymously and you feel like you can be heard. But really, at large, is to just keep making the conversation okay. And there's no bad questions, there is no wrong question, because it's a part of life. And what you talked about is interesting. You know, it's funny that someone could think they would get pregnant through kissing someone. And so a big part of sexual education is understanding basic anatomy, how the female body works, how the male body works, you know, but deeper than that, deeper than anatomy and where the clitoris is and the G-spot and the cervix and the prostate, like all these questions I receive, but you can access that online very easily. Deeper than that is an understanding of how our subconscious beliefs affects how we can connect intimately with someone. And so I think sex education is not just pregnancy, disease, and you know, just anatomy. I think sex education is about pleasure and feeling safe and even sovereign as a being in pleasure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes plenty of sense. And I think that's part of the issue that's going on. It's like sex is taboo. But when you think about it, we wouldn't be here without it.
Yeah, exactly.
So why, and I'm just curious, why is it so taboo? Why is it such an issue?
Well, I think there are different, you can look at different aspects of our evolution. But I'm telling you, I think religion plays a big part of it. Um, I think I think fear of pleasure plays a big part of it. I think fear of not having control over it, and it's in relationship with the evolution of relationships in our societies. Relationships for the longest time, and especially marriage, was an economical agreement. You know, you were getting married to have a family, to have kids, to pass on your possessions, and um, so it was not really targeted to pleasure. It was an alliance between different families, and we are evolving out of that differently depending on what culture you're from. And so I think this is why the conversation is becoming more important, because before, people were not getting married for pleasure. People were getting married for, logistical purposes, material purposes. And today people are realizing, oh, it's part of love. Like, I want to have that with the partner that I choose. And it's important for me to share that. How can I get there? So I think that's, two main reasons that I see.
Okay, you're speaking about pleasure. What do you, I'm trying to open it up for people to learn from, but what do you mean when you say pleasure?
So pleasure through intimacy, there's different levels of pleasure. So I'm going to talk about different pleasures from the bottom up. So if we just talk about sexuality, well, sexual pleasure, and for a lot of people, it's connected to, well, having an orgasm. Now, something really important for people who are hearing me and for whom it's new, there are so many different kinds of orgasm. Orgasms are almost an infinite experience. And people just think very locally in terms of their genitals. But there's so much more about orgasmic pleasure than what we usually think of. So there is that, orgasm and sexual pleasure. Expanded to sensual pleasure, which is the pleasure you get from your five senses: touch, taste, your sight, your hearing, your smell, like the pleasure you get from relating to someone and relating to yourself in intimacy. If we go higher, I think of emotional pleasure. And for me, that is the pleasure of being understood, the pleasure of your partner, your wife, your husband, your lover to truly hear you and see you and make room for your emotional experience. Then I think of pleasure as intellectual pleasure with someone. You have ideals you can talk about. You can share your vision. You can share your work. You can share, intellectually, you can share ideas. And finally, I think of pleasure as being able to connect spiritually with someone, whatever that means for you. If you're watching, just that idea of you feel connected on a soul level. So these are the different levels of pleasure I can think of in a relationship with someone with whom you share your sexuality.
So I want to ask a question. I don't know if it's too controversial or not. When you say pleasure, it's just all the cells kind of bubbling inside.
Oh,
and
that's a beautiful question. You mean like, how do you know it's pleasure?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think the answer is unique to everyone. I would say pleasure is an expression of expansion and a feeling of trust and safety. So it can be tingling, people think of like butterflies, but it can be just energy. It can be warmth. Pleasure can come in the form of relief and peace. Pleasure can come in many shapes and form, I think we tend to overthink things. I think as humans, we feel pleasure naturally. And it's to trust the body. I think a big part of feeling pleasure is to trust the response that your body gives you.
Okay, and that would be different for every single individual.
It varies. I mean, we have similarities, but pleasure usually leads to an invitation to relax, to soften. Now, because we have a different conditioning around pleasure, we have different beliefs, like we talked about before. Some people can be afraid of their own sexual pleasure, especially if they have sexual trauma. So sexual trauma can be rape and abuse, which happens to, sadly, a lot of people. But beyond that, it can be having been punished or shamed or hurt because of your gender. So all of these things can create in the mind a fear of pleasure. We know what pleasure feels like, but we cut ourselves from it because we're afraid of where it's going to lead us. And that's part of a lot of the work that I do with clients, helping them feel safe with their own pleasure in their own body.
And you work with men and women. Do you see big differences between men and women?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, Carla. It's such a deep question. There is this saying like men are from Mars and women are from Venus. I don't believe that. I think our conditioning for a lot of people makes it look like that way. But the more I work with people, the more I see that at the core, we are all humans. We share very similar fears. We share similar trauma. And we share similar desires and yearnings. So do I see differences? Yes, because of the culture people grow up in. But I don't see these differences as being incompatible. I see that a lot of men and women have similar fundamental desires, so to speak.
I know you can't go into detail, but what do you mean by similar desires?
The desire to be seen, the desire to be able to drop the armor and be vulnerable. So being able to share deep emotions, sadness, to cry, the desire to be understood and held, the desire to have a lot of pleasure, to feel loved and to be able to share their love. Similar desires as if wanting harmony in a relationship, wanting to be free, wanting to be able to be in a relationship, but at the same time have a career, have friendships, create in the world. Like these are very common human desires that transcend gender, that I see with people. And it's fascinating that these desires, when they're not met, they really show in the bedroom. They really show in sexuality as blocks, right? And this is why, for me, sexuality is not separated from everything else that we have. You and I share the same thoughts. We are holistic beings. And, our sexuality is part of our expression, it's part of our bodies. So this desires to be, if they're not met in everyday life, is going to create oftentimes blocks or distortions in sexuality, if that makes sense. Now, what I see that is not the same is, people have different conditionings about what it means to be sexual. And because in general, men and women don't grow up with the same education, it shows up in the way they relate to their own body and their own capacities.
So, and you also mentioned that sexuality could be very spiritual. To me, I believe that we're vibrational beings, and we're just in this body so we can experience the vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, how does this, well, it relates to spirituality for me, but how does how does that relate for a couple who's having a sexual experience?
I love that question. So I share the same beliefs as you. I feel like, the universe is vibrations. Matter as we feel it is vibration. It's just a denser form of vibration. And this is for me the most magical thing about sex. The most magical thing about sex, so I think I froze for a second, is that through the experience of our sexual energy located around our lower belly between our hips and our genitals, that energy can be felt and can move in the body and can expand throughout our head and can really give us experiences of oneness that are spiritual experiences of connectedness. And in the West, it's known as Tantra. Now, I know a lot of your audience is from the East, and I have a lot of respect for Indian traditions. So I know Tantra originally is way more than sacred sexuality. So that's why I don't use the word Tantra a lot. But even though I love what it contains. So for me, sex as spiritual is this idea like sex is a divine experience in the body that can help you realize your spiritual essence, your spiritual nature.
So when you see, because think about it, whoever's having sex, they're vibrational beings. Mm-hmm. And what brings us together is not when someone leaves the body, it's actually a spiritual experience. Mm-hmm. Because their consciousness and their who they are never goes away. Mm-hmm. They're there in our thoughts. Mm-hmm. So if that is the case, why don't we think of sex as a spiritual thing instead of a physical activity? Because it's more than that. Mm-hmm. And the little beings that come into the world are also beings who are vibrational. Mm-hmm. Help me.
Well, what is your question? Your question is, why don't we realize this nature of spirituality through sex? I think, again, as, ignorance in the sense of lack of education. Like, if nobody tells you, you have to find out by yourself. I think, again, it's just conditioning. The fear that is around sex makes us not really explore. I think porn gives a bad example because usually porn videos are very short. So people are just masturbating very quickly as a form of release, sometimes as a way to cope with stress and trauma. And so people are not creating the spaciousness in their life to really explore. So it's accessible to every single human on earth. It's part of who we are. And I hope people more and more realize the spiritual nature of sexuality, like you're saying. And also because when you have a spiritual experience, it can be unsettling if you don't know you're having it. It's like a moment where your ego dissolves, even if it's like for a very short time, or even if it's it's on the spectrum of intensity. But it can be very intense to feel this level of connection and oneness. And I think people just need to hear that it's okay, that it's a beautiful experience to have, and that it's safe to feel this way. What fascinates me is that when two people are drawn together and they have a spiritual connection, but also a physical desire to connect, we move from like being two different people to moving toward oneness. And we can have a spiritual experience that we can have by ourselves anyway. And then we go back to being two separate individuals. And I think it's a dance. It's a dance for people to feel safe with experiencing.
People are so afraid of sex. And as we say, you know, you and I never met in person, but I feel connected to you from our conversations. So, you know, and we wouldn't go a sexual way anyway because of our orientations. But still, this connection that we have made could, in some way, in a very weird way, be a sexual connection because we're talking, we're enjoying the conversation. Would you agree with that, or am I totally off the wall, which many people would say?
I think you're wonderful, Carla. Okay, so here how this is landing for me. I think there's like a beautiful opportunity in that question. What I teach my clients and what is important for me is that sexual energy is something that is, first of all, our own, and that can move within ourselves and be sublimed and take on different levels of vibration, so to speak. And you can have a conversation with a friend like you and I and feel a form of sexual awakening. So it's not a physical connection, it's different from like physical intimacy, but it can be a form of like awakening because your whole body is engaged in the conversation. And there is an intellectual connection, and there is a spiritual connection, and the heart is open and trust. So in that sense, you know, I feel like you can have an energetic orgasm looking at a sunset. You can have an energetic orgasm looking at a flower or being in a field in nature and feeling so peaceful. The other day I was looking on internet and I was looking for lipsticks for whatever reason. And I was looking at different colors that were so vibrant. And I noticed a tingling, an energy in my sexual center from the way the colors were. This one, I don't like it. And this one will create a resonance within me. And I think it's important to embrace that and familiarize ourselves with it so we understand that we have control over our energetic experience. Is that kind of answering your question?
Yeah. And on a live chat, we need to be careful. But it's true that people are so afraid of something that is so normal. Like they used to say the bird when I was growing up, did your mom tell you about the birds and the bees? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I finally figured it out. And people are so afraid of it.
Yeah.
And it's such a natural thing. The birds and the bees do it, the cats and the dogs do it, everyone. You know, all the animals do it, all the plants do it. Why do we see it as such a nasty thing? Because it isn't nasty. It's
not nasty. Normal. Yeah, you're right. I love that song. There's a song around it, you know, there's a jazz song. I think also, you know, when people are sexually awakened to everything we're talking about, and obviously it's a process for all of us, it's like a never-ending discovery. You feel more in your own power. You know, you feel more sovereign in your decisions, in your choices. You feel more empowered to express yourself in the world. And I think people are afraid of their own power. It sounds like a spiritual cliche, but it's true. You know, we are afraid of the wholeness of our power within ourselves. And we cannot be fully powerful without our sexuality being honored and on board. It doesn't mean you have to have sex all the time. It just means without yourself having reintegrated that part of you as whole and sacred and beautiful. And it's a great power. Not on other people, it's a great power for yourself in the world.
Right. And I mean, I've never really gotten this and why people are acting like this about this, but it's real. I mean,
it is real.
And we treat it like it's something dirty, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, that's very true. It's so funny, you know, when you watch porn, which I don't do much of at all because I'm always disappointed. There is so much of this connotation of naughtiness and dirty, and for some people it's part of like kink language, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But I really think it comes from childhood. You know, people are like, you know, it's dirty, don't do it, and there's this whole shame associated with it. But we can transform that. We can transform the shame. We can release the shame. We can play with it.
Right. And I'm sure there are people out there, they heard what we were talking about and they turned it off because it's something they have been told I shouldn't be watching or I shouldn't be talking about.
Yeah, it's possible. You know, people need to be ready for it. I also know that there are so many people, Carla, that are hungry for it. I receive so many messages from people who read my posts. And I'm so blessed to have a lot of colleagues and peers that are also relationship coaches that are doing this beautiful work. And because I have a conversation with other coaches, I know how much the world is hungry for this healing.
Yeah.
How much the world is hungry for releasing shame and feeling free and connected and finding what works for them, you know, feeling free in finding what works for them.
Right. I want to thank you for talking to me tonight.
Oh.
And what do you want to leave our audience with?
I want to thank you too, Carla. We haven't met for very long, but I absolutely love your openness and your sharpness and your fierceness. So thank you for having me here. I want to leave your audience with this. If you're watching this, I would like for you to know from my heart to yours that your body is beautiful. Your sexuality is sacred. There is nothing wrong with you. If you have sexual trauma, if something hard happened to you in the past, know that you can heal and transform that. And that pleasure is a gift. Pleasure is the gift that can help you feel more alive, more creative, more connected to your wife or your husband or your spouse or partner. And there is so much beauty and magic in feeling that connection to your own sexuality. And that whatever you're experiencing, you're not alone. There is someone else that feels the same. And that pleasure, orgasm, and love are accessible to everybody.
Thank you so very much, Marie. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we kept it to the point that anyone could gain something from it, whether they're scared of it, which many are, or whether they're open to it. And you handled it so beautifully and so delicately. Thank you so very, very much. Having said that, let me remind everyone that this show is sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which is an online organization promoting peace one conversation at a time. Marie, can we wave goodbye?
Thank you, Carla.